Study in grey. He worked a little harbour that most charts forgot, a rounded bite of coast with its downriver smell of tannin and rot, where the tide made lazy promises and the town made do with less than it needed. He kept his skiff on a rented slip between a pair of pontoon boats that never seemed to move. At first light he did what he always did. Coffee from the old thermos he inherited from a cousin, a swallow that hit his empty stomach like a soft hammer. He thumbed the choke, and the motor coughed once, then steadied into a hum. The bay slicked over with a dull shine that made the water look like sheet metal fresh from the press. He liked to be the only one out. It let his eyes adjust to the grey before the gulls started their commentary. His name was Cal Merrow. Folks around the docks called him Callie sometimes, though not to his face. He had a blue cooler he'd stopped noticing the colour of, a small anchor he'd set at an easy angle because the bottom was flat silt for a long way, and he had a hat he threw high on the dash when he got warm, so his forehead took on a pale trapezoid line while the rest of his face weathered. He did not think of himself as a successful man or a failed one. He thought of himself as someone who could read a tide by the shift in pitch along the piers, someone who knew which planks would slap when the wake hit. He cast the net on muscle memory. The weight sank out with a clean ripping sound as sinkers parted the surface. There was satisfaction in that sound, a neatness. He didn't listen for the motor anymore, didn't listen for the gulls. He listened for that tear in the water. The line came up different, not the heavy, living tug of fish, not the stubborn drag of weed. It was a docile heaviness, an almost polite resistance, and he had a stupid fear as he hauled that it would be something human and final. He braced, toes against a scab of dried salt, and heaved. What hit the deck was a wallet. It landed wrong, like a small, wet bird giving up. The sound softened against the wood, a tired surrender. The leather swelled pale like it had been left in a tide pool. The stitching held by luck. He flipped it open where the plastic fogged over photographs and old membership cards that had gone jelly around the edges. Sand or silt had made a tide line inside the fold, as if the wallet had its own shoreline. There was a single photo tucked in a tight sleeve, and he took it out carefully because water and paper made a sick kind of marriage. He tipped the photo to let the light find it, and had a slow, stupid moment in which he did not understand what he was seeing. It was his boat, not anyone's boat, not a model like his boat. The same blue cooler, the scuffed lip on the right side where a cleat had kissed it. The crooked anchor rope that he would coil better next time, and never did. The hat where he'd thrown it. The angle was wrong. He told himself it was from a bridge, except there wasn't a bridge out here, and the picture felt too close to be a plane, too steady to be a gull's eye trick. The water around the vessel was a grey plain, with no land to orient it, no horizon, like he was floating in a sheet of steel. On the back of the photo, there was a faint machine stamp, the kind he used to see on pharmacy slips when time was measured by rubber wheels and ink. He didn't like that the little numbers made sense to him right away, just after 3 in the morning, like the photo knew a thing about his life that he had not consented to share. He looked up at the cloud that didn't break or lift, only lay there in a woolly layer you could mistake for the inside of something. The bay made its metal shine. The shore was a smudge. He had the creature impulse then to throw the wallet back. He did. It slid under with an ease that felt intentional, like a hand had taken it. He told himself to work, to cast and haul and rinse the deck the way his body expected. He threw, he waited, he listened, and then the net heaved with a groan that matched his own. He dragged it up with the same practiced jerk, and there it was again, the same wallet. But the leather had tightened as if it had been wrung. Cleaner, the plastic clearer, the silt line smoothed. Inside was a second photo. He did not want to look, so of course he did. Same angle from above. He stood in it this time, hand on the rail, brow lifted in a way he knew from mirrors when he made a face at himself. He could see his mouth in that uncertain shape he made when he spoke to no one. No shore again, no other boats, no place for a camera to have stood. He flipped the photo over. The same faint stamp, a little earlier this time if his eye could be trusted, the way a tread of time wore backward like a boot, making prints in reverse. He set it down on the dash. He told himself that someone had a drone, and though there were no kids out with toys at this hour, someone could have messed with him. It sat on him wrong. The idea that someone had flown a thing over his head and he hadn't heard it. The air here carried sound like wire. He hauled again, because that was what he knew how to do, and because stubbornness won small wars. The third photo showed him staring up into the lens. He could see what the light did to his pupils at that hour, and didn't like what it suggested about his sleep. His eyes looked small and sunken, mean as old coins. There was a dark crescent in the corner of the frame, shade from something nearer than sky. The coil of his bow rope lay neat, which it never did, unless his hands were trying to curry favor with a habit. His breath shortened. He could feel the motor's vibration in his forearms. He set the net down and slid forward on the deck, flattening his chest to make less of a target of himself to whatever was above. The deck smelled of diesel and salt and the black mildew that lived in seams. The cloud had stopped being sky. He thought that quite clearly. It was a surface, the way it buckled if a breath hit it, like he lay under the hull instead of on it. He held his palm up along the gunwale and saw what he was not ready to see. A shape, faint as print through wax paper, leaned above the rail. It braced one wet hand on the other side of the metal and matched him finger for finger, the way a child might, the way a mirror does when you aren't sure which of you started the motion. He wanted to tell himself it was only reflection, that damp air could do odd math with light. But the hand was wrong in color, and wrong in the way it canted the wrist, like the joint had a different idea of the options. He didn't shout. He didn't pray. He slid back along the deck like a man who had lost a wrench and didn't he want to kick anything. The net lay there, its weights ticking as they knocked against one another with the motion of the boat. He opened the wallet again because the mind seeks a pattern in the thing that frightens it and hopes that underneath the pattern is ordinary. There was a fourth photo, not of the boat. A face filled the rectangle so wholly that the frame cut off the shoulders and top of the head. The face was his. It was taken from so near the lens that he could see at the crown the little whirl of hair the barber fussed with. In the pupil, a miniature world had been caught. The black lens eye, and a hand too pale to be his resting against his cheek, steadying him the way you steady something you care not to drop, the sense of someone trying again and again for a proper shot. He came up to his knees and put both hands on the dash. He was surprised that his fingers did not shake, that the old water-dried cracks along the knuckles did not break open. He set the photos down in order, like a man laying cards in a way that would excuse him from saying aloud that he understood a certain logic was at play. He thought the words, "I'm being looked at." He didn't like how the words sat in him. Not like a fear, but like the memory of a fear he had tucked away, and that meant it had a home in him somewhere. He did not haul the net again. He put the boat in a slow turn and let the motor worry itself into a deeper note. He felt watched with a specificity that made his shoulders itch. He told himself that the cloud was thinning, that a wind was coming off the headland, and that he'd see the line of bluff soon. He told himself that he'd chalk this up to a thing in the water that had picked up a tourister's wallet on a nice day, and fed him its trash because the hooks had been kind to him last week, and the bay wanted balance. He told himself any old kindness. When he eased into the slip, the harbor still looked under a bell jar. The ice plant's compressor kicked every few breaths, a click that found his nerves. The winch on the next pier gave a rattle like teeth. A gull landed hard nearby and cussed in its brand of church talk. He tied off, hands doing the work, while his eyes kept trying not to see the world as a lid. He put the photos in the glove box because you did not leave something like that out where anyone could ask the wrong questions. He kept the wallet because pretending he'd thrown it away never saved him from when the thing showed up again right where he stood. He walked the dock and let the boards talk to his boots. At the bait shed he met Earl, who smelled like iodine and machine oil and had a way of keeping the radio low so you had to meet him halfway across a word. "You hear the advisory?" Earl said, handing over a paper tray with shrimp that did not look fresh, and never did, because everything here passed through some middleman and got old on the drive. "What's the advisory?" Cal said, a plain question to keep the day standardized. "Sonar study out past the outer rock. They'll be dragging a thing for a week, maybe more. Maritime study says stay inside. They put a note on the board." Earl jerked his chin toward the bulletin board beside the scale. There were always old pictures there of flounder held out for the camera, their size made larger by perspective, and kids in rain jackets smiling so hard their faces went square. The paper tacked there now had docket stuff and stamps and words about seafloor mapping and a map that used symbols Cal did not trust. The advisory pushed you inward, closer to shore. It narrowed choices. "Fine," Cal said, which meant not fine, but he played along. Earl squinted at him. "You look like you slept on gravel." "I woke for a piss and never got back," Cal said. "You and me both. That radio last night got stuck on the weather loop. They said dense fog advisory like they were apologizing." Cal signed for bait he wasn't sure he'd use. He put it in his cooler out of habit. He watched a boy run past, trailing a nylon strap like a tail. On the board beside the advisory, there was a smaller note from the harbor office about the ice machine running hot and not to overfeed it. It was the sort of neighborly scold that made a man feel a little too seen. He wanted the overfeds to be somebody else. On the way back to the skiff, his phone buzzed and then stuttered in his pocket. He glanced. No bars. The network had the mood it got when fog got into the hillside relay. He slipped the phone away. He preferred a radio anyway. The harbor frequency hissed in the skiff with an old man's wheeze. He sat in his boat a while without turning the key. He could feel the weight of the glove box. He took the photos out and looked satisfied that their order was still the order. He rubbed a thumb on the back of the first until the light brought up the faint stamp again. There was no stamp on the fourth, which sent a small shiver of relief through him, as if the act of marking a time had been part of the offense and the face had been spared that. Back at his trailer near the scrub lot that held old boats and older cars, he ran the tap and let it spit rust before the water went clear. He washed his face and watched his own whirl of hair not settle. He stood over the sink for a bit with his hands on the rim. There was no one else in his place to set a new rhythm around him. The fridge coughed and stopped, an old compressor reaching for a handhold. He had a receipt taped to the side with a magnet from a hardware store that went out of business years ago. He had fallen into the habit of jotting the month and the change when he bought fuel. He thought about adding a line for this morning and decided it didn't belong on the same tape as the rest of his life. He dried his face on a towel that smelled faintly of the many places it had lived. He wanted not to nap, and then did, because deciding not to sleep was half the route to sleeping. When he woke to the radio-s breath, he lay there in the thin heat that collected in his place and counted his heartbeats without meaning to. They counted back. He avoided the glove box until dusk. Near dusk, the mosquitoes in his end of the lot came up from the low ditch like smoke. He swatted and swore and made little forward motion toward anything useful. He decided he would take the wallet to the harbor office like a good citizen and have a sensible woman behind a sliding glass window tell him a thing about what to do that had the tidy look of things done by daylight. He put the wallet in the pocket of his jacket, zipped it, because losing it would either fix everything or break it worse, and he wasn't ready to find out which. In the office, the fluorescents hummed a thin metallic note that set off the swell he carried in his ears since a day he stood too close to a blown valve. The woman behind the window wore a sweater that shed and got little pale hairs on the desk. She had a stack of laminated rules she could reach without looking. Cal slid the wallet along the counter of the window. "Found this out on the water," he said. He kept his voice plain. He did not say when, he did not say what else came up with it. She opened it carefully like it might bite. She clicked her tongue at the silt line and moved onto the photo sleeve. She slipped the first photo free. She grew very still in the way people do before they pretend to be unbothered. "Someone's drone," she said, but not the way she would have if she believed it. She took the second photo and laid it beside the first. Her eyes flicked to the back, and when she saw the stamp, she made a small decision not to mention it. He felt grateful and uneasy in the same breath, which was a talent he had not used in years. "I can log it," she said. "We'll keep it in the drawer. If anyone asks, we'll show them. Otherwise, it's not our business." He nodded, which was what you did when the rules met you halfway. "If anyone asks," he said. She slid the wallet into an envelope and wrote words on it in a small hand that made too much sense. She could have written the word fate, and he would have nodded like it was a street he knew. He stepped outside and saw that the fog had arranged itself into layers, and in the layers there were hollows where sound bounced. And he could hear kids playing a block away, as if they were in the next room. He listened for the far horn and did not hear it. He walked back slow, like the fog made a heavier air you had to push. At home he made a dinner that could not be called any one thing, heated in a pan he misused for most food. He ate standing, because a chair would make the day realer, and he wasn't ready to accept that this day had joined the rest. He kept the radio on the low weather voice. The loop apologized again for fog. He shut it off, and the silence felt like when a refrigerator stops, and you notice it has been running for years. The first night after the wallet, he dreamt of the undersurface, the way the cloud had become a plane that he lay beneath. In the dream, he put his hand to it and felt the give, and something pressed back with the measured curiosity of a stranger trying a door. He woke with his mouth dry and a taste of metal on his tongue, as if he had spoken through a coil of wire. He did not check the glove box. He did not want to teach his instincts any new tricks. Morning came, washed out. He could smell the tide before he saw it. He told himself to skip a day. He did not. He went to the slip and started the motor, and the harbor gave him its habitual reproaches and blessings. He told himself to stay inside the inner markers the way the paper had asked. He went along the inner edge and pretended the line there was new water and would reward him for his carefulness. He cast and hauled and hated the attention he paid to the net. He did not want to personalize it. The weights sliced the surface clean again, and that had a relief, but his hands were already braced before the net learned him. The haul felt like fish. Then it turned to the old polite weight. He felt his shoulders harden, as if he were bracing a door. He drew in the net, and there it was, a rectangular insistence moving in the mesh, climbing out of the water like it had a claim on air. The wallet had returned without the hospitality of a pause. He sat with it there in the webbing and considered leaving it. He did not. He worked it free the way you work a live thing without hurting it. He opened it with something like respect because he was tired of pretending it was trash. A new photo joined the others. He did not know the angle at all. It was lower now, as if the camera had decided to join him in his world and stand just behind his shoulder. His hands were on the rail in the way they went there by habit when he wanted to look as if he belonged in a place. The camera had a patience to it. It seemed to wait for him to show it the look that he would not admit to owning. He flipped the picture over. There was no stamp this time. The lack of the stamp had become as telling as its presence. He felt a foolish grief about ink and order. He placed the new photo with the others in a dry pocket of his jacket. He did not understand why he wanted them all together when every instinct said to scatter them. and a certain superstition he thought he had outgrown said to burn them at the pit beside the boatyard before the wind could change. The radio hissed into speech. A voice from the harbour office asked for confirmation from a research vessel you could not see in the fog. Another voice replied in a way that made the hair on his forearms move. It was not what the voice said. It was the quality, a patient lack of hurry that pressed on his nerves. He imagined the map on the bulletin board, the shapes behind glass deciding where he was allowed to put the boat. He turned for home not because he was told to, but because his own shape had gone smaller in the world and he did not want to feel it. He spent the afternoon pretending to fix the sliding door on the shed. The door had a track that had always been wrong. He liked fighting the same stupid fight again because it made time seem like a ring you could walk around without getting lost. He found a handful of screws in a jar a neighbor had left on his step last winter. He set the screws one at a time and listened to the way the wood accepted them. He could smell the rain before it came. The first drops sanctified the dust. He kept thinking about the hand, the matching of his fingers with the ones above the rail. He told himself that his hand was plain. There were scars on it that any man from the dock shared. He found himself staring at the pale map of them as if they were runes someone else could read. He tried for a foolish minute to hold his hand above his head and make that wrist cant a certain way. It did not. He put his hand down like he'd been caught making faces. He went to the diner for a late plate not because he was hungry, but because the buzz of someone else, Cis refrigeration, was better than his. The counter had those little jars of creamer that never spoiled, and a sugar pourer with a clog that made it spit a sad line on the napkin. He half listened to a pair of loggers talk about a truck that would not shift out of a gear that didn't to make sense. The waitress with the thin chain at her neck set his plate down and tilted the coffee so it didn't tea slop. She looked at him sideways the way people do when they are willing to hear a story if you can be bothered to tell it. He did not tell it. He asked for more toast. When he left, the bell on the door hit the same note it always did, and he loved it for that. At home, he clicked on the porch light and watched the insects make eccentric orbits. A moth smacked itself against the glass and slid down like a man trying to keep dignity. He sat and let the night find its shape. He did not bring the photos out into this air. He had the small, precise sense that whatever was interested in him liked surfaces. He did not want to tempt a reflection with an offering. That night the dream came again, with an added detail he could not easily shake. In the dream, he lay on the deck listening to diesel and salt and the faint laughter of things that had not evolved to laugh. He felt the press of a hand on the other side of the rail. Then the hand wasn't matching him, but instructing, as if it wanted his fingers to move a certain way, to make a shape a camera would like. He woke with his hand held in the air. He brought it down and touched his face, as if to verify the jaw was where he'd left it. The days ran on, each with its docket. The advisory stayed tacked, and the ink on it went bluer with damp. The ice plant complained and then recovered. A kid fell off a dock and didn't drown, and the town held that up like a proof. Cal kept working inside the markers, and the net gave him fish when it remembered him kindly and empty when it did not. The wallet came when it wanted. It did not come every time. He hated that he was grateful on the days it stayed gone, because gratitude tied him to it like a favor. When it appeared, it was like an old friend walking into the wrong bar. The photos continued. They began to show corners of his life he had not offered. The skiff tied neat, the shed in back with the sliding door finally done right, the trailer ES porch with the towel hung to dry on the rail and the moth making a smear of itself against the light. The angle from above softened sometimes, the lens coming down to meet him at the height of a person. On the back of some of them, there were the faintest stamp marks, incompletely inked, like a hand with damp fingers had slipped on the wheel. He brought one to Earl on a day when the radio didn't talk, and the fog sat close on the bones of the town. He set it on the wooden barrel where the scale lived and watched the older man's face. Earl did the slow stillness, then the fast normal. "Someone is playing with you," Earl said. "Kids are clever with their little machines." "You ever hear one above water like that?" Cal asked, which was not an argument, just a question placed on the table like a tool. Earl pursed his mouth. "Hear one? No, but I hear things all the time I can't name. You want me to name it, it's kids." "You sound very sure," Cal said. "I sound like a man who will live here tomorrow." Cal put the photo back in his pocket because leaving it would be a sort of adoption. He bought ice and did not overfeed the machine. He listened to the compressor make its will known. He went to a mechanic about a huff in the motor and listened to the man say words about compression that meant more money than he had available. He watched a gull swallow a thing too large and try to look dignified. He told himself to stop staring at surfaces. On a morning when the fog lifted and let the shoreline draw its line again, he took the boat farther inside the river mouth, where the water is brown and the smell is odd. He cast there, and the net sank without complaint and came up with enough to make the day work. When he laid the net down, a rectangle rose from it like a decision, but it wasn't the wallet. It was a photograph free in the mesh, its edges soft from wet. He did not think what a photo had to do with the river. He thought only that it had found him by its own means, which was worse in a way that made sense immediately and would take him hours to articulate. The photo showed his face again, nearer than a friend would stand. There was an expression he did not recognize as his. It was a look of waiting. In the glossy black of his eye, he could make out the suggestion of a narrow wrist and a lens, and a hand that had learned where to rest along his cheek to help him be still. He despised that he did not despise the hand. It had a carefulness to it. It held him in a way he had not been in some time. He put the photo in his jacket and let the day run to the end of its line. He started noticing, in a way he could not unnotice, that his own hands had started to act for the camera he would not admit was there. He found them arranging coils neatly when there was no reason to arrange anything. He found himself turning the hat to lay just so on the dash. He hated it. He caught himself at it and stopped. And then an hour later, he would discover that some part of him had done it again while he was arguing with himself about not doing it. It was a simple thing to put the cooler square on the deck. It was a simple thing to make the anchor rope lie like a drawing. He could feel it, the way the camera would like the obedience of a neat line. The thought made him sick. He bent the rope into an ugly shape and then had to stand there and watch it be ugly. He tried not to look up. He looked up. The cloud had come back over the bay, like a ceiling a shipwright had built out of the wrong material. He found the place in his mind where it was only a cloud and stapled the thought there, which worked for several breaths. The matching hand returned in the periphery of that thought. He did not put his hand up to meet it. He stood with his hands in his pockets and felt the old coin eyes of himself stare into a lens he could not see. The harbour office put a second paper on the board. There was a malfunction out at the waterworks and boil notices for a part of town that did not include him. Although the line drawn on the map jittered, you could imagine it creeping through streets like a damp that crossed out addresses. He listened to a woman at the window say, in a cheerful way, that these things happen and always resolve. He imagined the hand on his cheek, steadying him, and wanted to throw up from the mix of comfort and repulsion. He went home and boiled water anyway. The steam fogged the small windows and made little beads on the stovetop light cover until one bead fattened and slid. He tried to call his sister to ask about a neutral thing, like a blower motor she had talked about, just to hear an ordinary voice speak of an ordinary failure. His phone threw up its hands. No signal. He told himself that the relay would come back when the fog relented. He wrote down on a piece of paper what he would have said to her, because a habit of saying a thing can keep it ready. The slip of paper stayed on the counter with the other useless slips, mild among their clutter. On a day when the wind swung offshore and the fog torn itself up like paper in a bin, he took the boat out anyway. Different reason. He thought that open sky would make him bolder. It made him small in a new way. He cast and hauled and found that he missed the neat sound when the sinkers ripped through a smooth surface. He decided he would take no bait tomorrow, just to scold the routine into thinking of its place. The wallet did not come that day. He told himself that meant something had turned. He cleaned the deck so clean it looked like someone else's craft. He went home by the long route through the part of town where the streets didn't connect as you wanted them to. He drove slow past the old mill where weeds had memorized the cracks in concrete. He liked seeing a building try to hold its stance. The next morning, when he opened the glove box, the photos had rearranged themselves. He froze at the hinge, standing crooked in the boat, with one foot on the deck and one knee up on the seat. He told himself he must have nudged them. They lay in an order no longer chronological. The face from up close lay on top, as if saying this was the entry point. Beneath it was the shot of his deck, with the rope neat and the hat placed like a prop. Beneath that, the aerial where there was no horizon. Beneath that, the ones he had not told anyone about. The shed door, the porch with the towel on the rail, the inside of the glove box itself, the cheap manual in there with the picture of a motor he could no longer buy parts for. He had not noticed that before. Something had taken a photo of the inside of the thing he was now opening. He felt a tiredness near the back of his head that wasn't quite a headache. He lay the pictures out on the dash the way a man lays out a card trick, hoping to learn the trick by doing it. The engine idled because he had a habit of warming it a long time, as if kindness would make it live a long time. The idling shudder made the photos move. The top shot, his face so near, slid half an inch and came to rest beneath his hand. He did not like the idea that he could feel the heat of a face in paper. He heard a click then, not the click of the ice plant across the water, but a camera click. There was no camera on board. He knew the way a man knows the inventory of his own pockets. He stood very still because stasis made him less likely to be the one causing things. He listened for a second click and heard only the motor ES rhythm and a gull blade along the air with the noise of a handsaw. He put the photos away. He motored out and kept to the inner line like he had promised Earl, with a look he never actually gave. He cast and hauled and watched his hands attempt neatness and then defy it and then return to it like a dog returning to a bad habit. He noticed, with a sudden anger that had no place to land, that the shade in the corner of the frames had taught him to move slightly to keep it from blinding the lens. He had learned, unaware of himself, to improve a photograph no one had permission to take. He wanted then to do something rude, to take out his knife and slice a stripe in the surface of the cloud and swear into the cut. When he looked up, the cloud was not a surface. It was only cloud. Someone had persuaded the air to be simple. He laughed once, and it came out like a bark that embarrassed him. His laugh made no difference to anything he could see. At the fuel dock, he paid in cash that he had folded the wrong way, and the kid there smoothed it with his palm, as if money were a creature that needed calming. The kid said there had been talk of closing the outer channel for days at a time when the research folks did their biggest sweep. Cal nodded like this was expected. He thanked the kid for the kind way he treated the cash. He watched the pen at the kid's ear and envied its ease. On a routine evening, the power dipped on his street and made everything shudder to a stop. The fridge sighed. The clock he never set went dark. He opened the drawer for the small flashlight he never used and found it dead, which struck him as funny for a second, and then not funny at all. He sat with the open window letting in a warmish breeze that smelled like mud and fry oil. In the dark, he took the pictures out and felt like a thief of himself. He sorted them in a way that felt like a prayer, but was not. He had the impulse to call out to the empty room like you do when you are sure no one will answer. He did not. He found, behind the last photo, a strip he had not noticed. It was not a single photo. It was a strip, like the ones you get at a booth at a fair, a sequence taken too fast to make sense, the images like hiccups. In the strip, his face went from surprise to the look of someone trying to sit still in a place that made him itch. In the last square of the strip, his eye had looked left, not at the lens, but at the thing that steadied his cheek. He could see, clearer than he had in any of the single pictures, the hand that held him. It was not a stranger's hand in any human way. The skin had a sheen to it that looked less like moisture and more like what happens when light hits something seen through water. The knuckles were pronounced where his shouldn't be. It did not look hungry or gentle, it looked occupational, like it had a job, and his face was where that job took place. He did not sleep well that night. In the morning he jumped at the fridge's return to life as if it had shouted. He made coffee that tasted like mud and was grateful for the bitterness. He went to the harbour office first thing because the light there was always a sort of fairness. He meant to ask the woman at the window to open the drawer and let him see the wallet he had left, as if verifying it would make a certain chain hold. He stepped into the office and saw that the drawer stood open and the envelopes inside had swelled with a wetness that did not belong. The fluorescent buzz sounded ill. The woman was not at the window. He tapped the glass and then saw her stand up from under the desk with a look that tried to be cheerful. "There was a leak," she said, which was a word for many things that had nothing to do with pipes. Came down the wall, no stain on the ceiling, nothing to show for itself until the drawer started making that noise. "I can't find the source. The wallet you brought, we had to move it. It's in the back drying by the fan. The pictures are, well, they're not what they were." He nodded, like this matched some plan. He asked to see. She led him to a back room that smelled of paper gone wrong. There was a fan, moving a small slice of air in a defeated circle. The wallet sat on a towel with a dark ring under it. The photos lay fanned out near the fan. The top edges fluttered. He looked at them and knew them and did not know them. Where his face had been, there was the suggestion of a face in the way a portrait smells of its sitter. The edges of things had run together. The hand in one of them had retained its shape better than anything else, like the water had held on to the parts it understood and let the rest go. "I can make you a copy of the log," the woman said, as if paperwork made a talisman that worked against leaks you couldn't trace. "It might make it feel official. These days, people like official." He thanked her and declined. He stood a minute with his hands in his pockets in a back room that had not been meant to hold customers. He listened to the fan and thought about how a thing like air can feel like a gesture without meaning. He told himself he would take the wallet back and put it in the water where it wanted to be. He knew that was not what he would do. He carried the idea of returning it all morning. He motored out. He put the boat where a man would put a boat to make a solemn act private. He had the wallet in his hand with its loose edge and its smell of drowned library. He said some words that were not prayers and not curses. He let the wallet slide over the side. It went down with a neatness he envied. He stood there and did not cast the net. He waited, as if patience were a coin you could spend. When he did cast, the weight sang. He hauled. The wallet came up with the net. It came up cleaner than he had sent it down, as if it had passed through a bath. Inside, there was a single photograph that he had not seen before. It had been taken from so near that he could not find the context of the deck or the bay. It was only skin, and the suggestion of a seam at his eyelid, and the shadow of a wrist, and the question of whose breath had fogged the lens. On the back, there was a stamp not quite dry, and a line of ink that had dragged like an apology. He read the time and felt a small drop of cold at the top of his spine. It marked a moment very near his being there on the water, nearer than a minute would hold. He did the math, and he heard his cousin's old voice in it, a sound that got him through the bad times. You don't need to understand a thing to be under it. He put the photo with the others, and for the first time, the weight in his pocket felt not like being watched, but like carrying a small creature that might need him. He hated that he understood that role and could fill it. He took a slow turn and came back in along the inside line, the markers nice and clear today. On the dock, he met a man he did not know. The man had a packet with a badge he didn't to show and a pen that did not write when he wanted it to. He asked Cal if he'd seen the research vessel. Cal said he had not. The man asked if he'd seen a drone. Cal said he had not and did not ask what kind. The man wrote a line on a card and left it with him, the ink pale and insufficient. And Cal watched him walk away and thought of the way officials never had the right pen when it mattered. He fingered the card and then tucked it into a crack in the dash where small things went to be forgotten. He could not keep away. The next morning drew him the way rust draws to iron, the way a net shies not from a fish, but from the emptiness it finds more often. He went out to the place where the first oddness had arrived, as if beginnings have a claim on you. The fog had decided to make a little cathedral with arches in it. He stood under one and made himself small in a way that looked like humility. He cast. The weight sang. The net took its time. He felt the polite heaviness come up against his palms and did not fight it. He knew the wallet waited in the wet, and he made room in his mind for it. When it came, he did not open it right away. He sat with it on the deck where the wood had dried to a certain pitch of grey. He set his hand on it and felt the slight shiver the deck carried through the hull. He let his breath go slow. He opened it. The picture inside was of a hand on a hand, fingers laid to match in precise sympathy. Not his hand, not the others alone, but the place they met. The skin on one side had the faint rise of hair and the little healed nicks of a man's work. The skin on the other looked as if it were built to carry light in it. The space between the palms had a small wetness place, like a new pledge where two beings had pressed and left something. In the upper right corner, the shade that had blinded prior frames kept its distance, as if it had learned better manners or had been asked. He sat with it a long time. The motor thrummed, a gull made its saw noise, the inner channel threw a ripple. The photo at the edge of the deck caught a fleck of spray, and the drop beaded and sat and did not run. He did not wipe it off. He felt the space where a man has a choice, and the choices made different kinds of sense. When he got home, he put the pictures in a drawer he used for things he did not trust himself with. He shut the drawer and sat in his chair like a man who had walked a long distance without moving. The fridge hummed in the background, and the neighbor's wind chime hit 3 notes again and again with the wind coming in lazy from the river. He stared at the blank wall where most people would have a calendar with a landscape. He thought of the hand that steadied his face, and how in the worst moments of the dream it had wanted him to be still, while something in him that believed in fairness tried to shake free. If a man begins to look at surfaces long enough, he starts seeing language in them. He had never been a believer in signs, but now he could not help reading his day in reflections. His face in the microwave door, his shoulder in the trailer window when the light outside made a mirror, his hand in the truck's side panel when he passed and saw it bent like a funhouse version. He walked with his head down to avoid catching his own eye. That evening, he took his coffee and the photos to the shed. He set the photos on the workbench, the wood stained with many brief repairs that had not taken. He told himself he would catalogue them. He would leave dates off, leave times off, do it by feel. He told himself he would not look at the faces, and of course every other moment he looked. He tried to see if there was a change in light that would suggest where and when an unseen hand had stood. He traced the shadow crescent in each frame and found that it had moved only so far as he had moved, as if it took its geometry from his rough habits. He turned one over and tried to think like a machine that stamped ink. He held it against the bench to see if the wood grain would leave a mark. He dragged a pencil point along the stamp to bring out its grooves, the way school kids use a coin rubbing to learn something about currency. He felt foolish, but less alone in his folly when the pencil found nothing, because nothing shared is a kind of company. Outside the shed, the distant siren did its brief call and cut. He listened to the hard pause after, which was always more telling. He thought about how the town liked to call anything short, that way a false alarm, and move on without giving the body that jump for nothing. He did not notice at first that the photos were dampening at the edges. He had brought no water with him to the bench. The shed smelled like wet rope anyway. He touched the edge of a photo and his finger came away with a sheen that was not quite water and not oil. He lifted his hand and watched the droplet bead and fall. Where it hit the bench, the wood darkened and took on a smell, the sharp salt rot of the place where the bay gnawed at the end of the street. He found that he was crying not in any usual way, not sadness, but a thin, clean line from the corner of his left eye, as if the picture of his own eye had made his own try for symmetry. He wiped it with the back of his hand and tasted salt. He put the photos back in the drawer in a heap because the order had started to feel bossy, and he wanted to be rude back. He shut the drawer and pulled it open again to make sure Rude did what he asked. The photos lay in the same heap he had left. He felt a small victory that he did not trust. He dreamed a new thing for the first time in more nights than he liked to count by feel. In the dream, he stood at the harbour office window with his palms flat on the counter. The woman behind the glass had no face, or she did, but it was turned away, making a space for what would stand there later. He could hear the fan in the back room and the sound made by paper drying. He could smell the leak. He looked down at his hands and saw that they were very clean, cleaner than he ever got them. It took him a moment to see why. The hand from the other side, the grey one with the light inside it, had taken his hands and washed them. He woke with his hands clenched, and they smelled faintly of the bay. He did not turn the radio on that morning. He walked to the dock and felt the town watching him, the way a place can when it needs to be told how to feel about a thing. He nodded to no one. He started the motor. The noise had the little huff the mechanic had warned him about, and he loved it for being the same problem he'd had all along. He turned away from the inner markers and went where he knew the paper would not have sent him. He kept his eye on the surface where the sun made a strip. He cast the net so carefully that nothing in the world could take offense at the motion. He felt the weights slice the skin of the bay, and the noise was perfect for a long breath. He did not have to haul to know what weighted. He did not need the drag to tell him the shape. He hauled anyway, because not hauling would make him someone else. The wallet rose with its old politeness. He welcomed it with what grace he could find. He opened it on the deck with the inevitability of a man flipping a breaker. Inside was the photo he knew would be there and had not been able to predict. A face like his taken so near that the lens had learned how to forgive pause, and in the deep of the pupil a reflection of a hand on a cheek, and a lens, and in that lens the smallest mirror of a boat with a man and a grey hand and a sky that had learned how to be a surface. He held it until the motor's hum found a tone he had heard before, in a distant time he did not want to name. He set the photo down with care he did not owe it. He looked up, and the cloud did what he knew it would do. It went from sky to plain, a slow subtracting of distance. He put his palm to the rail and felt the old briny warmth of metal. He did not lift his hand to meet the other. The other met his hand regardless, through the thin of the knot water that had learned to behave like a barrier. Finger for finger they matched. He held still like he would for a man taking a photograph you did not want to ruin. In the patient quiet between the clicks, he could almost hear the thing decide on him. He could almost hear a kind of breath. He said in his mind the sentence that had arrived with the first picture and had not left. "I am being looked at." He found another sentence near it that had a different flavor. "I am being fitted." When the click came, he did not flinch. The hand at his cheek did not move. The motor idled its old huff. The gulls argued about a bread heel. The bay lay down under a sky that had made up its mind to be something it had not been before. He breathed out. He did not raise his other hand. He let the camera try again. He did not tell anyone about the last click, about the patience in it, about the way he had felt the sentence shift in his head from being looked at to being fitted. He carried that inside like a small live coal and pressed his tongue against the roof of his mouth to keep from saying it in a careless room. He did the things that made a day look like the others. Coffee from the old thermos, though it had begun to carry a flavor like wet cardboard bait bought without eye contact, a nod at the bulletin board that had grown crowded and damp. He took his place in the narrow part of the inner channel and pretended this was prudence and not containment. The advisory on the board became a new one, with more words and a map that had learned to draw a tighter loop. The paper had a feel to it when he touched it, a softness, like bread left in air too long. The research vessel S-calls came and went in a language that had all the right nouns and none of the right temperatures. Some nights the weather voice forgot itself, and a tone came through that sounded like the dignity of a violin string until a hand tightened too far. People coughed and joked about fog in the lungs, the way they joked to make a thing smaller. Earl went on, weighing fluke, and looking at men with his posture of building a bridge between his doubt and their need. The woman at the window learned to keep a towel under the drawer. At the diner, they set out bowls with little packets of a cleaner that smelled of false citrus to keep the damp from making the napkins stick to the counter. He moved within all that, like a person who had agreed to the terms of a card game he didn't remember shuffling for. The photos kept finding him, not only by way of the wallet. Sometimes a picture rose out of the net like a creature that had learned to grow a paper skin. Sometimes he would find a single square on the deck after a day when he was sure he had not brought any out. Once in the shed, a photo slid from behind the radio on the shelf, where there was no space for anything to hide. They kept their angle when the angle pleased itself, and they came closer when it wanted fuller rights to his face. The camera had a steady hand, and when it shook in a way that made him want not to blame the hand. When he tried to set fire to one, it learned to bead. He did it in the metal pan the trailer park insisted you use for anything that might throw a coal. He sat at the little fold of yard that pretended to be a porch and struck a match. He held the match to the bottom corner of a photo until the heat made his finger ask a question, and the corner blackened, then glossed, then dew came out of it, clean salt water with the taste of iron, and the flame drowned on its own. He threw the match into the pan, and it went dead with a hiss like the ice machine in Grace. He sat there and looked at his failure, and could not feel either satisfied or completely disappointed. The world was a better hand at discouraging him than any person he'd ever let try. On a morning that had the look of the weather wanting to be kind and failing, he tied his skiff and walked the docks parallel to shore, as if walking on that direction would make him feel less pulled. There were spots where the boards had gone grey and soft. When you stepped on them, they gave as if water had gotten into their thinking. He watched his boots leave a wet print and saw that the shape of the print for a blink had that fine crosshatch you see in photographs when the paper has been pressed drying across mesh. He stood at a right angle to the air for a minute and reminded himself that his eyes were his eyes. His heart beat a little too fast. He let it. At the harbour office, the woman had a band of red under one eye, as if she had slept with her face against something. He considered asking whether she had dreamed strangers had pressed their palms to the other side of the glass. He spoke instead of a permit that had expired without ever doing anything in the world. She stamped where the stamp should go and left a damp ring that dried into a mark like a sound wave. They looked at it together, like neighbors looking at a stain. "You know about the closures further out," she said. and though it could have been a question, he heard it as a tapping of a rule with a pencil. "I heard," he said. "They say it's for mapping," she said, and smiled like that was a neutral thing. "They say it S for a study that S got to do with the way the bottom behaves." He did not say what the bottom of anything had ever done but hold up the top until the top noticed it. He took his stamped nothing and stepped back into a light that had the color of dishwater that had seen too much plate. Back at the slip, one of the pontoon boats that never moved had a new tarp on it. Navy, so dark it stole light from the deck. A man was affixing bungees with a concentration that men bring to small chores when large problems stand nearby pretending to be trees. Cal watched the man's hands. They were nothing like the hand in the photographs, and yet the muscles in Cal's own forearm remembered the gentle firmness of the other and tried to answer it. He flexed his fingers with a small grimace and picked up the net from the bin, as if picking up a thing he had broken and might break again. He kept to the inner channel because the paper had asked, and because he had started to feel a fuse in each rope out past the markers, slow burning lines that could go with an indifferent pop. He cast and hauled and felt ordinary densities in the web for a little while. When the polite wait came, his hands softened without permission. He brought the net in and did not need to look for the rectangle. It lay quiet in the rope like a sleeping face. He slid the wallet from the net with the care of practice and opened it on the deck. There were 2 photographs inside, stuck together where the water had made a small covenant. He pried them apart with a fingernail and laid them side by side. One was of his hands, only his hands, resting on the dash where he never put them, crossed at the knuckle like he had been told to do it in finishing school. The other was of a window that was not his window. It looked like the harbour office window, but wrong by just enough that you saw the wrongness first and then had to hunt for how. The glass had a faint waviness like old panes in old houses, and the inside of the space beyond the glass was not the office, but a place that suggested office the way a sketch suggests a horse. He held that one longer. The idea of a thing building a version of a room for him to recognize cut a sliver down him that did not bleed but made him very tired. Plain rooms built badly by outsiders offended him even when the outsider was a person. He put the photographs away less neatly than usual. He cast and did not listen for the clean rip of the sinkers. He felt watched with mothering focus. He wanted very much then to have a conversation in which 2 foolish people shook their heads and told each other they were overdoing it. The town had never been good at seeing a person panic and meeting it with anything but a suggestion of sleep. He slept that afternoon because the body is disloyal that way. He woke at a drag in the light when everything in his trailer looked like a substitute made by a school theater. He stood at the sink and ran the water, then remembered the boil notice and turned it off. He looked into the dark well of the drain and thought of looking down into a lens. He set his hands on the rim. His hands left a print on the metal that looked as if it had been breathed on from below. He pulled back as if a small animal had licked him. When something starts fitting itself to you, all your efforts to refuse it look like rehearsals for your acceptance. He tried that week to stay off the water. He told himself he would go 2 days without leaving shore. He walked aimless loops around the bramble lot where the ruined boats lived, and the dogs there spoke to him with voices he knew. He cleaned the air filter on the truck and put it back and took it out and put it back with the same economy of motion he brought to the deck. He opened the drawer and shut it and opened it again and laughed at himself for what he was doing to his own pulse. He did not last past one evening. At dusk, he found his feet on the dock and his hands on the knot without deciding to have a choice. He pushed off, and the cleat gave a little farewell bark he always liked. The bay had gone to a dull mirror with scuffs in it. He kept the motor at a pace that suited someone with nowhere to be. He did not cast. He let the skiff idle in a slow line toward the mouth of the river, as if the river might offer a different geometry of attention. The frogs had taken up the ditch voices along the shore and made them their own. He opened the glovebox because the quiet asked him to. The photos lay in their stack with the sullen deference of children sitting how they been placed. He slipped them out and felt the coolness rise off them like breath. He laid them along the dash. The slight thunk they made as they settled made him think of the old click. He put the last one, the close face at the end, and held his finger on it for a second until his fingertip took on a numb chill that he pinned to fancy. He was not ready for a fresh photograph to slide itself out from between two old ones on its own. It moved with the momentum of a thing on a very slight incline. It came to rest against his wrist with a kind of asking. He looked at it. It was no longer a study of him. It was a picture of the water's underside, taken from a position he could not have stood in. The surface was a ceiling that held light like a nervous animal in a cage. Dark above, pale below, the camera SI had chosen detail in the wrong places. Here a swirl of a hand in motion that matched his but not. Here the long line of something like a rail seen from beneath where no rail could be. He put his thumb on the edge of the photo and felt a small lift, as if the paper wanted to take itself back, and he had to decline it gently to keep it. On the back, there was no stamp. There was a smear of something like algae crushed on a white rock. He lifted it to his face and asked his nose to be honest. It smelled like the ditch of his town, like river, like the metal of the old bridge upriver, where teenagers once tried to prove their courage. And very faintly, it smelled like iodine on Earl's sleeve. He set it with the others and had to steady the other photos with his palm when a wind came under the dash and tried to pick up the whole stack and put it away for him. He pulled in then because he felt, for a quiet second, supernatural and ridiculous. He did not like himself when he felt like that. He tied off and got the angles wrong and redid them because he could not bear to leave them wrong for small reasons. He took his stack and slid it back in its place, and that should have ended the day. But when he turned to step out of the boat, the world came across him in a particular way, as if a camera had shut its eye to keep the exposure right. He stood very still and taught himself how to breathe like someone in a narrow attic. At home, he tried for a new trick. He covered the reflective surfaces with rags and a towel and a shirt he never wore. He draped a long strip of canvas across the trailer window and the small mirror that came with the place and the black square of the microwave and the smiling glass of the framed photograph of his father from long ago that he kept less out of love than out of duty. He made his place look like a body after a fall, draped, cautioned, kept from the public view until the family came. He stood back and could not tell if he had made a sanctuary or a stage. He slept anyway, because men do. If the dream changed, it did it quietly. He no longer lay under the surface waiting for the hand. He stood behind the glass of the harbor window with no face and waited for someone to ask him for help. He felt the urge to offer a towel. He felt the patience required to explain the new advisory. He felt a cool hand at his cheek, guiding his smile to the right size for the public. He woke with the sound of a camera in his head and the numb ghost of a wrist weight. On a day that would have been unmemorable in any other year, a note went up on the board that the outer channel was closed until further notice, and folks said further notice the way one says never in polite company. Cal read it and nodded like a man whose body had already learned the narrower turns of the inner channel. Behind the paper at a slight angle, the board bulged as if it had swallowed too much damp. He pressed it with his thumb and felt it give, and when he pulled his thumb away, there was a print there that took a while to forget him. He tried to strike a bargain then. It was a tired bargain, the sort a man makes with a machine when the machine is going to do what it does regardless. He said aloud in his trailer, where the air smelled faintly of the boiled water kettle and a coil of electric heat, that he would allow himself to be posed if he could watch the thing pose itself too. It was a stupid demand if you thought about what verbs are greedy where they live, but it made him feel like he was in the room. He said it, and then looked at his own hand like he had used it wrong. No answer came except the neighbor's wind chime. He felt better anyway. He made a plan to go out when the hour arrived that came just after night pretended to give up. He walked to the dock before the diner put their lights on. The planks had collected a dew that looked like the pleading of a green thing. He stepped into his skiff with a care he reserved for the tired hearts of things he loved. He did not hurry the motor. He let it find its old huff and folded the sound into his sternum. The bay lay like a sheet of steel bitten by a dog at the edges. He aimed for that place where the surface had first felt like a surface. He moved with a slowness he would have mocked in a younger man. He did not cast. He did not perform any of his ordinary rituals. When a gull called, he held very still, as if the gull were a man he did not wish to wake. He stood in the front of the boat, where the foredeck narrowed, and the rail felt like a rule, but not a law. He kept his hands low until he did not. He raised one until it matched the rail's height. The world matched him back. The surface that had been cloud and then not cloud presented itself with the careful manners of a host who has learned the taste of you. A hand rose on the other side, a hand that now he could admit looked in some small ways almost like his own after work, if his own work had been under a different gravity. The fingers were just as long as they needed to be. The wrist had its old cant. The palm had learned to offer. He did not press his hand to it. He kept it a little away, a politeness. He waited. The other closed the gap. He felt the tiniest cold along the skin, where someone else's skin should have been warm if it were human. He felt a firmness that had nothing to prove. He felt nothing like hunger in it, and everything like a task. His own palm wanted to sweat. It did not. He felt the hum of the motor come up through the rail and into both hands at once, and watched, with a part of his mind that could watch a flock of starlings and still pull knots, the way their contact made a slight distortion in the air that moved outward like a ring in a bay when a fish touched the underside of a thought. The camera sound did not come right away. It came after he had made that small bargain with himself and broken it. He bowed his head. He held still. He let the weight of the hand on his cheek teach him a new angle. He found that he could make his face into a thing that did not argue. The first click came, then another. The second one had an apology in it, the way someone says sorry when they bump you but had to get past. He opened his eyes on the surface. He saw only his own reflection, and it made him think of boys peering into pond ice to find something moving beneath. He did this again the next morning and the next, until the pattern built a bridge without asking. He told himself he wanted to know what the camera wanted. He learned instead what his own hands wanted to do when they were allowed not to be useful. He came home after mornings like that with a steadiness in him that felt indecent. He had the sense that a part of him had been put somewhere and he had gone there and picked it up and brought it back. And this was what medication must feel like for people who believed in doctors. The photos began to change in their small way. It was not a leap. It was dull. The frames held him less, held instead the set of the boat, the posture of the dock, the curve of the harbor window's glass. In some of them you could see the reflection of the camera in the glass, and in the camera the reflection of the skiff, and in that reflection, the suggestion of someone who might be him and might be someone made from the idea of him. He spent longer than any man should looking at the little reflections in the pupils of eyes that were not drawn to be eyes. He felt like a child, drawing circles inside circles until the paper went dark. Earl saw him looking and said nothing for once. He turned a fish over to find the line he wanted to cut along, and said only, "You run in the outer line." The words held the test in them and the kindness. "I'm inside," Cal said. "Good," Earl said, though it meant poor, and left it there. It was an agreement to call something by a name it did not answer to. It was a relief, a weak one, when a new problem showed itself. The power began to dip irregularly. Lights faltered, refrigerators gargled, the ice machine misbehaved and made small pink ice that made tourists nervous. Someone said the substation had gone soft and would need a part from a distance that might not send it. In the dark, quiet, Cal learned the exact hum of the neighbor S generator and the complaint in the wind line when a gust wanted to be a storm and lost ambition. He sat with the photos in the dim light, like a man with cards in a room with no stakes. He dealt them to himself and did not ask a win from them. The new photo strip, when it came, did not slide into his pocket from the wallet. It came out of the air. He had set the old fan in the shed to a low run to keep the fare dry, and the strip rode the faint breeze with a stubbornness that made him want to climb into the motion and walk on it like a treadmill. The strip stuck to his sleeve, and he peeled it off and held it up. 4 squares, each a little worse in focus than the last. They showed not his face, but his hands again, and in the last square, the hands took hold of something less than a cheek, and more than a face. The thing had no features that would land, only a set of shapes a camera would use to understand the idea of a mouth. He felt a nausea that had nothing to do with his stomach. He put the strip down and looked at it from a distance, the way you look at a wound through a window. He did not pick it up again that day. He held off the water as long as he could after that. He woke before first light and sat in the chair that used to be his father S and watched the window he had draped with canvas breathe in and out. He told himself to wait for 2 more hours, and then for 1, and then for less. He listened to the insects offering their diligent, tireless argument about their right to be here. He stood, picked up the keys, set them down, picked them up again, went to the door, paused to fix his hat on a nail the way the camera liked it, hated that motion, took the hat down again, walked out, came back to lock the door because the habit wanted dignity, and finally made his way to the dock with the momentum of a thing that had toppled the wrong direction and had to see where it would end. He cut the motor halfway out and drifted. The bay looked usual, which now made it look strange. He found himself whispering. He told the air he wanted something learned. He said he would not fight, that he would make an honest picture. He raised his hands like a penitent. The surface came up to meet him in the way bridges only dream of. The camera took him like a steady rain taking a roof. He felt the hand at his cheek before he could steel his jaw. He let the jaw go. He told it to do what it wanted. His eyelids wanted to close. He closed them. The minutes, or the kind of time that minutes come from, passed. The motor idled. A far siren found a throat in the fog and tried to clear it. He breathed through his mouth to keep from tasting the cold on the hand. The first click sounded like a toy. The next had grown into a tool. The third was a document. He thought the word document and felt his chest itch as if stamped. He had the sensation then of being told, none of it verbal, that the photograph would be of someone else now. He opened his eyes. He saw through something. He saw through a pane with a grain to it. He saw his own cheek and his own jaw, the way a man sees himself in a Barber S mirror while looking at the hand that holds the scissors. He saw the bay from above in a way that did not use altitude, but did use a kind of understanding of level. He saw a hand like his own, but lit from inside, a wrist that moved with a kindness he was helpless to respect, a camera that was both more and less than a camera. He understood, not with words, that he was correctly placed. The click at that instant made a note like the sound of a bottle when the cap turns and the seal lets go. He took his hands down in slow time. The other hand did not follow, or it did, and he did not see the gap to register the motion. He did not cast, he did not haul. He rowed the line back in and tied up and found that there was no correct way to step onto shore after a morning when you had done that. He failed them all gracefully. He kept living in the manner the town accepted. He waved to the kid with the bad pen. He bought ice and did not overfeed the machine. He left the radio off for a day and then turned it on to the weather voice out of habit and turned it off again when it apologized to him the way a person might. He put one of the photographs on the inside of the shed door, taped at the corners, and did not look at it while he worked and did not look away from it either. He picked up screws and set them in wood and did not know whether he was building a thing or simply performing a human for a lens. There came a morning after a night when rain had the idea to be constant and almost was. He went out because staying home was a given he could not accept. The bay acted innocent. He put the skiff in the line the paper still allowed and set the motor to a patient pace. He did not intend to work any net. He intended to sit and be taken like a person you do not leave alone at a party. He held his hands up without drama. The surface did not change shape, but changed attention. It found him. The hand met his. He could feel the press in a way that made him think of something being measured and found suitable. He accepted it. He looked up into the non-sky and set his face politely. The camera made its first click, and in the space after it, he had the idea, and he knew it had come not from him, and not entirely from the other, an idea placed between them like a coin on a bar, that he might place his hand not where the other placed it, but elsewhere. He took his supporting hand from the cheek the camera loved, and set it to the rail and set his weight against it, as if pushing on a door that had not been opened since the kind of dawn he did not count anymore. The pain gave a little. The hand on the other side drifted with his motion and did not resist because resistance did not belong here. He pushed until his palm went numb. He held. The motor coughed a warning he knew and had decided to ignore. The camera stepped in toward him with its attention like the tide sneaking up a little further on a shoe. He did not push more because he had the sense of being rude. He let go. He said in his mouth what he was not brave enough to say in his head, "I will return the favor." He meant that he would learn the angle of the other wrist. He meant that he would find the touch that steadied and did not own. He was not sure the other would offer the cheek. He was sick with that kindness and with the way he had made it a promise. He went home with that in him and counted himself both compromised and intact. His inventory of the kitchen, 2 mugs that never matched, a chipped plate, the pan he used for everything, had slipped an inch into place. He could see the alignment shift and did not think he had done it. He took 1 mug and set it sideways on the counter so the camera would be mad. He laughed at the pettiness and felt clean. He ate a piece of bread without butter and called it supper. He did not sleep well. When he did, his dream had no harbor now. It had the pain and the hand and a lens that came so close he could smell a faint sweetness like the finish on old wood. There is a final day in a business like this. It does not announce itself, not to the person in it. It arrives the way an account arrives at its last line. He woke before dawn, as always, and walked the dock as always, and started the motor and set his hands as if to a wheel that wanted him within it. He took the route that would put him under the old imagined bridge that had never been built. The bay made the sound it made through all of human effort. The fog came when called. He kept the boat where the inner markers ran like a fence. He did not look toward the outer channel because to look was another kind of leaving. At the forepeak, he lay flat as he had the first time and slid forward until the rail touched his cheek. The deck smelled of diesel and a sharp newness, as if someone had wiped it with a cloth dipped in some solvent that smelled almost human. He placed his hand on the metal. The other hand found him. He matched fingers. The match was perfect now, and that scared him for the half of a breath before it soothed him. He did not speak. The camera positioned itself with decorum. He thought of the first photograph, the one with his cooler the wrong shade of blue in that light, and his rope coiled by accident into a neatness he hated. He thought of how the rope had worked to please without his permission. He felt in a small bone near his temple a something like a tap, the way a mechanic taps a part to test its honesty. He kept his eyes open this time. He watched the surface become nothing, and then something, and then nothing again, the way a stubborn door will look like a wall until one smooth hinge tells the truth. He saw the camera's eye grow large until it was all he could see, and then he saw in that eye a small version of himself, not distorted. He held still. The hand on his cheek guided his head a hair. He learned finally the grey wrist's angle. The first click came like polite thunder in a hall. He stayed. The second came, and his jaw went light, as if waiting for a barber's fingers. The third did not come. Instead, a quiet went through him that discovered bones he had forgotten to name, and as his vision steadied on the black in the lens, he saw behind his own reflection a set of shapes aligning, and he knew that if he was asked right now to return the favor, he would know how. He raised his other hand. He found the cheek that was offered to him on the other side of the pain, which was not pain, which was nothing but a neatness of the air. He took that face in his palm as carefully as anyone ever took a bird out of a child's hands, careful to support a rib that did not quite exist, careful not to bruise. The skin was not skin, but it had a give, it had a yield, like good rope. He pressed a little. He steadied. He felt the camera grow easy. There was a click then that did not come from his side. It was a sound that went through him and hit the motor and hit the rail and hit the gull that stood king on a bollard a distance away, and the gull lifted and pretended it had meant to at that particular instant. He stayed where he was. He held his job. His face did not ask questions. He looked instead into the black eye and saw not the boat, but an image of a room that was not quite the harbor office and not quite his shed, and he saw, as if to reward him for seeing, that in that room there was a drawer, and in that drawer there was an envelope, and in that envelope there was a wallet, and inside that wallet there was a picture of a hand on a cheek, and inside the pupil of that cheek, S.I., there was the reflection of a man he would not say was him, holding. The skiff must have moved then. He did not register steering or change. The motor found a new note without his help. The surface did not release his hand but ceased to demand it. He took his palms away with the same politeness you take your hand off a friend's shoulder when the friend has stopped shaking. He stood and looked around, and everything was ordinary. The bay, the fog, the gull on its stupid perch, the inner markers, the faint sound of a diesel from shore, the smell of the ice plant putting its complaint in the day. He laughed once, in a small way. He placed his hat on the dash, just so. He felt the small meanness of himself at that, and loved it. He did not see until he was tying off that his hands had gone pale. Not in the sick way, in the way of light shining through skin from somewhere it had no business to be. He turned them over and saw the old nicks that mapped a man's life. The light did not come from those. It came from the thinness accumulated where work wears you down. He flexed, and the light flexed, and the mischief in him made him show his palm to the sky like a child finding a new trick. He closed his hand, and the light kept itself. The town did not stop its motions for any of his days. The note on the board yellowed and made crisp sounds at the corners when the door shut. The power dipped and returned. The ice machine learned a new sound and kept making it. The research vessel finished a sweep no one could see and left without waving. Earl kept his radio low and his knife clean. The woman at the window started bringing her own towel from home and hung it on a hook where the public could see it, a gesture that made some men kinder who needed that cue. Cal took the wallet one last time to the water. He did this in plain daylight, with a gull following him like a critic. He stood where the inner channel marks had their innocent red and green and held the rectangle in his hand without anger. He spoke a few words to it that were not words, more a pattern of air, and let it slip. It slid under with a satisfaction that made him think of work done well. He did not cast. He held the rail and waited with his old patience for the politeness to return. When the net came up on its own, he took it without thinking about permission. It was empty. It was not. A single photograph lay in the web, as if the rope had learned to cradle paper. He picked it up and turned it over before he looked, as if the stamp on the back could tell him a thing about sequence. The back was blank. He turned it. The picture was of the harbor office window. On the inside of the glass, two hands lay flat, palms out, as if to push someone away or call them home. One hand looked like his own. The other did not. Between them, where the palms would have met were it not for the glass, there was a bead of moisture, round and content, catching a small version of the town in inverted clarity. Dock, gull, man, skiff, sky. If he held the picture close, he could smell the clean smear of a window, the faint exhale of a person standing too close and trying to be polite about it. He tucked the photo into his jacket pocket and felt, absurdly, like he had been given something official. He walked to the office in no hurry. The bell on the door made its note. The fluorescent buzz argued with itself. The woman looked at him and then at the towel, as if considering what would be asked of her today. "I'd like to see the drawer," he said, and because he had never asked anything of her that laid a claim on her private room. She nodded and let him around the end of the window and into the back. The drawer stood open to dry, whether it needed it or not. The envelopes in it wore their bruises. He reached for the one that held his name in her hand and found the wallet gone. In its place was the shape of it, a dry silhouette. He ran his finger along the edge of that absence and felt the smoothness of clean metal. The fan was off. The room smelled like nothing but paper. "It went missing," she said, "a day or two back. I had the sense it would. Sounded crazy as it came out." "No," he said, "I don't think it's crazy." He placed the new photograph on the desk without looking at her face to measure what it did to the day. She took it and looked and set it down in a tidy way, like a person puts down silverware that is not theirs to wash. She slid it back toward him. "I think that one's yours," she said. "For your file." "What file?" he said, and it was good to say something so obvious and have it feel new. "The one you carry," she said, and her smile tried for the safe kind. "The one that keeps the days from falling out of your pocket." He took the photo and did not put it away. He stood, the way he had in the shed with the fan, and looked at the paper that had been dried, and the drawer that had learned not to be sorry. He had the small feeling of being a man in a building in a town that had learned his shape and had forgiven him one thing. At dusk, he sat on his porch and watched insects make poor decisions. The neighbor's wind chime made its 3 notes the way always it did, and he loved it. He set the photographs in a stack and left his hand on top of them as if to keep them from leaving, as if to keep himself from doing the same. He thought of the other hand and how it had taught him to hold. He put his own hand up and tried the angle of the wrist. He saw that he was getting it right. He was not sure how he felt about that. He let his hand find where it wanted to be. When the light emptied from the street and the porch lamp tempted out the moths, he went inside and did the small things that make a place feel used, rinsed a mug, set a pan on the stove to dry, flicked the radio on and off. He did not draw the drape over the trailer window. He left the glass bare. He stood in front of it and let his face find the neutral expression that made cameras brave. He waited a breath and another. There was no click in the room. On the other side of the glass, inside the dark, a whiteness bloomed the way breath blooms. He lifted his hand and set his palm to the window pane. The glass was cool, and then it was not. Another palm fitted itself from the night to meet it from the inside. He did not move away. He thought of the boat, of the pane, of the rail, of the camera, of the hand. He stood there until his own breath fogged a small house around the place where they met and kept it warm. He stood there long enough that, if you had taken a photograph from outside, you would have caught a man holding the shade steady so it could practice being his home. The skiff stayed tied. The advisory did not lift. The fridge kept up its breathing like a heavy animal taught to sleep indoors. In the mornings, he walked the dock and nodded to Earl. In the afternoons, he cleaned the shed and pretended to hunt for a socket that was not where it should be. In the evenings, the hand behind the glass waited for him with the kind of patience you reserve for someone you have lived with a while. He did not resent it. He did not welcome it. He accepted it as he had learned to accept tide tables and compressor noises and boil notices and receipts taped to fridges with the month and the change. The town narrowed its choices and found new ways to call that a virtue. He shrank to fit and learned that fitting can feel like a trick and like a comfort at once. On the last day, any of this suggested a line could be drawn under it. A kid out on the pier threw a rock and whooped when the splash surprised him more than it could have. The rock made its ripple. The bay settled. Cal watched the rings and thought of the distortion when his palm met the other palm. He had the sudden, gentle knowledge that someone somewhere he could not place would one day open a drawer, and in that drawer would find a wallet, and inside it a photograph of a face taken from so close you could see the little whirl of hair at the crown. In the black of the eye, there would be a reflection of a grey hand holding someone steady while the camera tried again. He felt neither threatened nor saved by that thought. He just felt measured. He stood later at the trailer window with the glass bare to the night. He lifted his hand. The hand met him from the inside of the dark. He learned again the angle of the wrist. He steadied a face on the other side. He held the moment for the click that never had to come. He kept holding, because sometimes the work is in the holding and not the picture, because sometimes the picture is just proof that something was held exactly long enough. He watched his own pale hand in the glass, and in it he saw the shape of light that had learned him. He put his face close to the pane. He breathed. The pane buckled and did not break. The night pressed back in gentle repetition, matching him finger for finger, until both sides, by practice, could do it without thinking. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more content. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Feel free to leave a comment below with your thoughts or questions. I love hearing from you. Until next time, take care and stay awesome.